everybody. Welcome back to another midweek episode. So last month, my wife and I were able to spend a couple of days away celebrating our anniversary, and we went to a bed and breakfast here in Minnesota. And it was the first morning we went down for breakfast. We were chatting with the couple who ran the bed and breakfast, and they found out that I was a pastor, and so we began to engage in further conversation about the church. And I remember very distinctly that the woman asked me this question: what do you think is the biggest challenge that the church faces right now? I just flipped that question back around on you for a moment. What is the biggest challenge or problem that the church faces? Or to be more specific, what's the biggest challenge that your church faces, whether it's here or elsewhere? I mean, there's a lot of directions that you could go. I mean, you could talk about financial shortfalls. You could talk about leadership burnout. You could talk about a lack of evangelism. Like, there's just not new people that are showing up. You could talk about the young adults and walking away from the church rather than retaining them. I mean, there's a lot of directions that you could go with that question. In fact, when she asked me that question, she thought she knew what the answer would be. She thought it was about finances. She talked about their church and some of the financial struggles that they face, and it just seems to be so prevalent within our churches. And I'm like, you know what? It's true. That is a challenge in our churches. But I didn't want to talk about the challenges of the church from a business mindset. That's so often where we go. I wanted to go deeper. And so I said this: I actually think the biggest challenge that our churches face is misplaced priorities. And we've got people who do not consistently show up for church. We've got people who are focused far more on themselves than they are on Jesus. It's about self-desires, or even when it comes to the Bible and interpreting it, it's about self-interpretation versus submitting to what Jesus says is good and best for us. And when I gave that answer, you could see how she's like, that's not where I expected you to go, but that is so true. And this is what the Apostle Paul gets at in his letters. I mean, you want to see churches that have problems? Don't just look at your church. Like, look at the first century church. The letters that Paul writes are often to confront problems that are prevalent in the church. And I just want to let you know, any problem that your church has, Paul probably faced it already in the first century. And so you look at his letters, and what does he say again and again and again? In the midst of these problems, he points us back to Jesus. Like Galatians 2 verse 20, it says, I've been crucified with Christ and I no longer live. It's not about me, it's about dying to self. Jesus says, if anyone would come after me, he must deny himself, take up his cross and follow me. So Paul says, I've been crucified with Christ and I no longer live, but Christ now lives in me. Or in Philippians chapter 3 verse 10, Paul says, I want to know Christ. I mean, what would it look like for our people if they simply lived by that mantra? I want to know Christ in everything, in every way. I don't want to get distracted by the ways of this world. I don't want to get caught up in my own self-pursuits. Paul says, I want to know Christ. In Colossians chapter 3, he says that we should keep our eyes, our mind fixed on what is above. And who's above? He says, where Christ is seated in the heavenly realms. He says our life is hidden with God in Christ, and we wait until he appears. And this is just over and over and over and over again what the Apostle Paul points us to in the midst of the problems that we face in the church. And I truly believe that at the heart of every problem the church has, whether it's leadership burnout or financial shortfalls or young adult retention, or however you answer that question, the greatest problem that we have is misplaced priorities. We have taken our eyes off Christ. It's my responsibility, and it's your responsibility to put them back on Christ. So, may we look to Jesus, because in the midst of the plethora of problems that we face in our personal lives, the churches that we attend, the answer is Jesus. Only Jesus. Thanks for joining me today. I'll see you again next time.